Welcome back to the Matside, powered by Inner Mat Wrestle. On this episode of the YouTube show, we're going to break down the finals of the RTC Cup and the top two matches from the Tar Heel Open. I'm your host, as always, Richard Mann, and joining me, Clay Sauertieg. Clay, how are you?
Feeling great. Just got through probably our biggest weekend of wrestling in at least 6 months or so, longer than that. Looking back to March, had some big names go down, had some big names come up big. Had a ton of action on a pair of cards, and feeling pretty good about where we're at wrestling-wise.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those times where an event that looked pretty epic and iconic on paper kind of delivered. I mean, we got to see, with the exception of some late pullouts from some folks, some for mystery reasons, some for health reasons, but I think the event still had plenty of star power, and we got to see some of the matches that we sometimes miss in events like this, so that was a win. Yeah, it's going to be a good time to talk about it. We are only going to break down the finals, but if we can kind of slip in some events from the rest of the dual tournament. So if you were living under a rock, basically what they had was 6 regional training center teams. There were some fill-ins from other clubs and stuff where there was openings, and they had 2 groups of 3 wrestle in pools and then advance to a bracketed tournament. And in the end, the Cliff Queen Wrestling Club defeated the joint or unified team between the Southeast RTC and the New Jersey RTC.
Yeah, as a whole, I thought we kind of covered it. The event was fantastic insofar that I think you might see some more names should it continue into the future. Obviously, some issues there with people that were hosting and some clubs there with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club and the Atlanta Wrestling Club. But should Titan Mercury continue to do this and should it prove worth it for them, I could see them being additions in the future. And when it came to the finals, I think going into this, I had the club that won, Cliff Keen, as the best club I thought going in. Really good showing for the Southeast RTC / New Jersey RTC combined team there. I think I would have had them probably a little further down on paper, behind the Ohio RTC and maybe behind Cornell as well, or Spartan RTC, whatever it's called now. But we ended up with a really, really fun finals and some really fun matchups leading up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the event was such a hit with the hardcore wrestling community. I hope it continues. I really enjoyed it. My worry is that because there haven't been any international events recently, I worry that it was just Titan and Flow or whoever had money just stashed away, and they were like, hey, let's give these guys an event. Mm-hmm. I do think that for the continued success of the United States on the international level, you need to compete internationally and not just against, your domestic guys. But at the same time, I think this is probably the pinnacle from like a viewer fan engagement perspective. I just think that, duels are easy for people to understand and watch. If you're a viewer of, college wrestling, it's easier to transition that way. And, it's a lot of names that people know too, and associated with the RTCs, which are associated with colleges. So I think for like a semi-casual or less like hardcore wrestling fan, I think this is really a gateway to the freestyle world. I'm curious to see if it continues, but I definitely would not mind watching if it was an annual event.
You mentioned it. I think there are definitely some issues there with where it would fit on a normal schedule and where the funding is coming from. And there was a little bit of discussion about formats and if it's going to be associated with RTCs, like how many people can you bring from an outside team? But as a whole, I mean, I think we talked off air before we started going here about it really went off for the most part without a hitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like the RTC because I think that that's really brought a lot of funding to our wrestlers. I think that's a good way. But if it turns out that it's like the basketball tournament that they have in the summer, where it's just you just put a team together and enter, I think that would be great too.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch it either way. So
absolutely.
All
right, so let's start off at 57 kilograms, representing the Southeast RTC / New Jersey RTC. Nahshon Garrett taking on Cliff Keen representative Seth Gross, and I think. We talked a lot about Seth Gross in freestyle when he wrestled against Joe Colon. And this kind of showed up in his recent match against Bryce Meredith too, is that in freestyle, he's going to score a lot of points, but he also puts himself in position to allow his opponents to score a lot of points. And that didn't necessarily materialize here. Early on, it looked like, this was going to be another back and forth thing, but Nahshon really never let Gross get on the board. The final score was 12-4, and Gross got one takedown, and he got points on a finger grab, and he got points on a caution while Nahshon was stalling out. So I thought it was very impressive defensively that Garrett was able to avoid Groth's normal scrambly style. And he also clearly watched film, because when Gross went for his 2-on-1, he immediately reached for the leg with his other hand and scored a takedown. So I think that Nahshon perhaps didn't have the strongest tournament that people were expecting, especially because this was plus 3 kilograms. But I thought here in the finals, it was probably one of his better performances of the tournament, and probably one of his better performances for recently as well.
Yeah, I think Nahshon definitely grew into the tournament as it went on. I'll kind of circle back around this. Interesting that there was no second day weigh-in, and I think had a big part to do with it, but looked fast, looked explosive, looked decisive in that match against Gross. When he decided to go, there wasn't any real hesitancy. Had a big double. I don't remember whether it was a double for 4 or it was almost 4 early in the match.
Yeah.
That kind of opened things up. And then it looked like Gross was going to get back into it at one point. I think late in the first period, it was probably I want to say 6-2. And Nahshon ended up picking up a late 2 in the first period and just kind of keeping that separation where he could then kind of take his foot off the gas in that second period. I do think format-wise, I get that this was on short notice. I think in the future, that if the event happens again, you have to have, even with an allowance, a second-day weigh-in. Particularly with an allowance, you have to have a second-day weigh-in, especially when you say, okay, the first round is just pool play and just for seeding. Nothing matters until the second day, so why not bring somebody that just can make 57 or make 65 for a day, even if they look like crap on the first day? Nothing matters until day 2. And then you're looking at somebody like, think about somebody like a James Green, who actually I thought looked better on the first day in this instance. But, I mean, if he can make 68 on the first day, you wrestle him once, and then he's probably, 74 kilos the second day or thereabout. But when it comes to this match, yeah, I thought Gross did a good job, or Garrett did a good job of kind of neutralizing Gross's 2-on-1, staying out of bad positions. He was only in parterre once and wasn't turned. And really, I thought grew into this tournament, like I said, kind of with his best performance in the finals.
Yeah, on the weight, I think that it probably helped to get wrestlers to come out and do it, but the fact that there wasn't going to be a second day weigh-in. But I think especially with the Olympic weights, where there's such a huge gap between the weights, I mean, going into the second day, when we heard that there wasn't a second day weigh-in, it was like, well, we know the guys, this is going to help. And for the most part, it did. Like you said, I kind of agree that James Green looked better on the first day too, but I mean, he just looked sucked out and gaunt on the first day, and at least physically looked much better on the second day.
Should Nahshon and Garrett have wrestled Darian Cruz on that second day? I mean, the weight difference would have been like 12, 15 pounds.
Yeah, for sure.
It would have been like silly.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, we talked about Garrett. Let's talk about Gross here, because I think tournament was kind of a mixed bag here, because he lost against Nahshon, but he went 3-0 the rest of the tournament he teched Jacob Camacho and Darian Cruz, and then beat Zach Sanders, who he had some trouble with early. I think I was just surprised by this result in the final, because I thought down at 57, Gross has had a lot of good results recently. And I just thought that he was, kind of moving into that dark horse territory for the trials. But now this match, it was just so one-sided from an offensive perspective that it kind of makes me reevaluate.
Gross's game is so weird in that he's probably outside of Spencer Lee and maybe Dayton Fix got the best parterre in the country at 57 kilos. You could probably throw Tyler Graff in there if he was back at it. But he also, outside of that 2-on-1, everything he does from neutral is so upright. And particularly with the guy that's explosive, like a Nahshon Garrett, like I say, he just got doubled off the mat. And I get that he's comfortable with guys in on his legs, but if they're able to double off and drive through, I don't care how good you are with guys in on your legs, you're going to end up in a bad spot there. And with some guys, if they're just working that single, he can kind of close down a wizard and then work from there. or try to get his hips back or work for various exposures when they're on his legs. But it played really into Nahshon's hands in this case, where everything he does from neutral is so upright and he's so exposed that Nahshon was like, okay, I'll take that. Thanks.
Yeah, and we saw that play out almost exactly as you were saying in this match, because late in the match when Nahshon got hit with that second caution, I think myself and a lot of people watching were like, uh-oh, like the caution out is in play. And then it was almost immediately Nahshon just doubled him for 4, and that put the match out of reach. So, yeah, I mean, it might just be one of those styles make matches situations. So, let's move on to 65 kilograms. Matthew Kolodzik, who this is the only match he wrestled in the tournament. James Green was representing the Southeast RTC and New Jersey RTC for most of the event, taking on Alec Pantaleo. And Pantaleo ended up getting the win 8-6. Big win for the headgear non-enthusiasts. Pantaleo, I thought it's interesting to me because I think normally when I think of Pantaleo and his style, he's so stocky, he's so strong, built for 65, has a great entry on his double that he can go to a single. He seems like a guy who's built for freestyle, sort of like a Frank Molinaro, where his style clearly made jumps on the freestyle side. In this match, though, it seemed that Kolodzik was the one who was getting the freestyle points. He hit him with a chest wrap twice, one of which I thought should have been 4, but they reviewed it and they stuck with 2. But in the end, I think it was just too much offense for Pantaleo. He's basically able to get to takedowns when he wanted to, push the pace, and he sealed it with a late step out off a double. So I think Kolodzik had a good showing for himself because Pantaleo just looks so good in this tournament. But at the same time, I think that there was clear things that Pantaleo needs to work on, especially taking on more freestyle savvy guys on the international scene.
Yeah, one of the things I think Pantaleo has done really well, and one of the things that I think works for him at the freestyle level, is he doesn't waste energy, if that makes sense. He only expends energy for those big moves. So it was almost like, okay, I'm going to do as much as I need to do to win, but there may not be necessarily more than that unless he's able to get to his offense in terms of parterre. Because it seems like every time he needed points here, he was able to go get them, particularly late in the match. But he was never really able to separate from Kolodzik, who is a pretty freestyle savvy guy here. I want to ask you, were you surprised that it wasn't James Green in this situation?
Yes and no. I think that James Green, he looked pretty spent after the second Yanni match, and I think Kolodzik was there, so I think they kind of wanted to give him a match. I don't want to like impugn anyone's motives or anything, but I thought Pantaleo, I mean, prior to this match, he was 3-0 and he had outscored his opponents 27-2. And, you know, if you're James Green and you're a guy who likes to get in there and get physical and, you know, work for your own doubles from space, I mean, I think that that's a tough match stylistically and physically. So I don't necessarily, you know, blame him. He wrestled, like I said, all the other matches, but I would have liked to have seen the match, but I also don't like blame anyone for sending out Kolodzik either.
Yeah, Kolodzik, to his credit, like we said, looked, I thought, really good for being just thrown in there in a really important match in the biggest duel of the tournament. I just wonder whether Green gives that team a better chance of winning the tournament.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is interesting to put out your best lineup all the way to the finals and then maybe, you know, change it up when the entire tournament is on the line. But I don't know. He may not have been 100% healthy either. He did tweet out that some memes saying his neck and his back were killing him. So it might have been that too. But you agree that it was 4, right?
I want to say a history of back issues, correct? So, I mean, there are bigger and badder fish to fry for James Green right now. Looking forward to Tokyo.
You're with me that that's a 4, right?
I didn't hate that they kept it at 2, but I could see the only reason I say that is because Pantaleo in the situation where it was chest wrap was on his knees and was almost like lifted to his feet, but didn't quite come the whole way off the ground. It's a little weird. It's like it wasn't I guess technically you could say it was feet to back because he was on his feet at one point, but he was on his feet in the midst of being chest wrapped. So it's not like they were
Right.
in a standing position. I would not have hated either call.
I think it's one of those situations where if you go by like the letter of the law, it probably should be 4, but we see that position called 2 so much that it's like, it's more like simpatico with the way matches are scored. But I think if you were to like, I mean, because you look at the rule book, it literally says that if you're standing
on your feet,
on the feet.
And there was
right,
a lot of people who were upset with the way it was called, and I wouldn't disagree with them. So I'm not really taking a strong stance here.
And I think it's one of those things too, where you can look at the match and you say, well, the final score is 8-6. If that had been a 4, it would have been 8-7. Because he wouldn't have gotten the failed. Well, the failed challenge point. So,
yes.
So it's easy to say that it would have, changed the result, but it's also like, I mean, I think Pantaleo wrestles the rest of the match differently if it is called a 4. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And again, I didn't think it had a huge. I guess we ended 42, but it would be interesting to see the technical points there because I think Cliff Keen probably still wins it.
Yeah, I think you're right there. All right, so let's move to 74 kilograms match between Mekhi Lewis and Logan Massa. And I thought that Mekhi Lewis, he took some lumps in this tournament, and he came out and looked pretty solid early in this match, was able to, get to Massa, score a takedown. But Massa really, I think Massa's like biggest improvements, at least in freestyle, have been just tactically. I mean, I think he knew that it was going to be really hard to finish on Lewis. We've seen a lot of wrestlers get in with his foot up in the air and can't finish. And he seemed fine to settle for step outs on 2 occasions. And once he got a lead, I thought it was pretty much, I mean, I don't think he shut it down. If anything, I thought he did a good job of holding center and not getting passivity called on him. I mean, there was no points in the second period. First period ended 3-2, 3 step outs for Massa, 1 takedown for Lewis. And to not be put on the clock at all for an entire second period when you're only leading by 1, I think that's a positive for for Massa. So even though it was closer than I probably would have expected, I thought it was another solid showing for Massa.
Yeah, so I'm going to make 2 points here that regarding Mekhi Lewis that I think might contradict themselves a bit, but first off, I do not think that this was the best version of Mekhi Lewis this weekend. I think most people would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that having won a junior world championship and having won an NCAA championship, we, especially after a year off, tend to put people in an air that they necessarily have not quite reached. Where Mekhi Lewis has had a fantastic age level career to this point, and he's just about halfway through? Not even halfway through? I guess he hasn't completed his sophomore season of eligibility yet. But I think a lot of people also expected him to come out here and dominate guys, where he's never shown that he's head and shoulders above a guy like a Logan Massa, who's on his day a fantastic wrestler, or head and shoulders above like even a Carson Karchler. Like we talked about it going in off air with a group of friends that I could have seen Karchler winning. Karchler did win in the early match where I would have considered Mekhi a favorite. I think I labeled him a 3-point favorite, but it's not like Mekhi is going out there and majoring and attacking everybody in the country at 65. At 165 and at 74 kilos. So it's not shocking to me per se that he's losing these matches. I did not expect him to lose the Balfour match, which was a bit surprising. But I also think that people maybe put expectations on him that weren't necessarily fair.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty round assessment of the situation. I also think that it partially could just be rust. I mean, he did not compete since Senior Nationals 2019, and so that's like a full year out of competition.
Well, and all of those things, all of the matches that he lost, I think he went 1-3 or 1-4 on day. It's not like he was, other than the one in parterre, getting killed. Like, it's like, oh, okay, a better version of Mekhi Lewis, which exists, can win each of those matches. Just didn't have a good weekend. but he's also not at the point for me where it's like, oh yeah, Mekhi Lewis is going to cruise through all of these people.
Fair. On the Massa front, he went 3-1 on the weekend and surprised me. He lost a match against Tommy Gant. I think that we talked a lot about, Massa recently when he beat Bexad and how this is a guy who seems to be rounding into form. I was really looking forward to, him versus Dake. Dake didn't end up showing up. I think Dake clearly would have won, probably would have teched him, but I wanted to see it just because I think that his command of the match is just so solid right now in freestyle, and I think that he's going to be an interesting wrinkle at Olympic trials. It's just unfortunate that he's at such a stacked weight.
Yeah, I think 74 right now is very intriguing in that you have Jordan Burroughs, who's at the top of the heap. You've got the Chaser and Kyle Dake, who I think a lot of people, myself included, think can go with Burroughs and is right there, obviously world champ, 79 kilos. And then you have about 17 different guys who you feel could beat one another at 74 kilos. You've got Jason Nolf in there. You've got Isaiah Martinez in there. You've got Mekhi Lewis in there. You've got Logan Massa in there. You might have Mark Hall in there. That's yet to be seen. Supposedly, he says that he can't make 74 anymore, so maybe 79 or 86. But there's a lot of names in there. You have Vincenzo Joseph in there. They're all kind of vying for that title of like the next guy on that level. So it'll be super, super intriguing to see how those shake out come trials.
Yeah, and I mean, the other angle of this match, too, is that these are two guys who still have college eligibility as well. So that 165 class, not as deep, I don't think, as 74 on freestyle. But, you got both of these guys coming back. Marinelli's got another year. So, well, Vincenzo's gone. But I think that that's going to be another solid weight if we ever do get some form of a college season this year.
Massa's going to be, like, what, a 27-year-old senior?
He might take another Olympic. You don't know.
Why not? But yeah,
is that a thing?
65 is looking really strong with those guys and Marinelli and Travis Whitlake, Shane Griffith. A lot of talented guys in there to be excited about should we get this season.
Absolutely. So that was a big win for the duel. Southeast RTC basically needed to win 1 or 2 of the next 3, and there was some hope that Nate Jackson could get it done here against Myles Amine. Nate Jackson had a very strong tournament up until this point. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Myles Amine was on him from the jump, scored an early takedown, laced him 3 times to go up 8-0. Jackson then was assessed a penalty point for bumping heads while being admonished for bumping heads, which I thought was pretty impressive. And then Amine hit a snap and go behind to seal it up 11-0. Let's talk about Amine here, because Amine, while absolutely dominant in this final here, he did have a somewhat surprising loss against Trent Hidlay, who had a great tournament. And his other match was an 8-2 victory over Brett Farr. Myles Amine's a guy who wrestles for San Marino internationally. He's already qualified for the Olympics. He had a great result at Euros in 2020 before the shutdown. So just a great all-around guy. Took a surprising loss here, but was completely dominant in the finals against Nate Jackson.
Yeah, I think this was a really interesting case of styles making fights. Myles Amine is a pretty athletic guy, likes to shoot from distance, likes to get on low singles, work up. Pretty strong guy, is able to work through a lot of guys' hips. Whereas Trent Hidlay is built like a goddamn tank. He's not one of the taller 86-kilo guys. He's very explosive. And I think the strength of his hips was probably a little bit surprising to me, where he wasn't able to finish from some of the positions he's normally able to finish on, or he wasn't able to get to angles that he's normally able to get to, because Hidley's a pretty stout and pretty quick guy. It's really solid. Whereas Jackson, who I thought was fantastic up until this final match, I think stylistically it worked out really well for Amine, where he's able to match Nate Jackson athletically or thereabout, where not many guys are able to match Jackson's quickness and explosiveness. So he was able to kind of match that quickness, get some angles, and work through the hips on some of those low singles, And also his parterre looked great. You mentioned was able to lace him up to go up 8-0. So I think it was definitely a case of styles making fights here for each of those guys.
Yeah, I thought Nate Jackson had a very good showing. In the tournament overall, he went 3-2 with victories over Drew Foster, Brett Farr, and Sammy Brooks. He had previously lost to Drew Foster before coming back in the rematch and putting up 11-0 tech of his own. I think that this 86 kilo weight is really interesting domestically because we've seen guys, Nate Jackson's in the finals of the U.S. Open, and then Myles Martin wins the 8-man challenge, and then Amine, even though he doesn't wrestle for the United States, he has a great showing in this tournament. And then, Trent Hidley coming out of nowhere here and just, dominating the field, winning all his matches. So obviously the big person missing from this due to a COVID test was Jaden Cox. Would have been a solid performer at 86, I'm sure. But I think in the end, what?
Was Jaden going to go 86?
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
97.
Would have been 97, yeah. So
well, no, I only asked because with the weight allowance, I don't know where he's at. But
entirely possible.
Yeah, I think so. This has been discussed at end, so I'm not going to take too much time. I have no issue. Not only do I have no issue, but I'm happy that Myles Amine is competing for San Marino and getting his opportunities. But man, it would have been so much fun to watch him thrown in the mix at like a U.S. Open or a Trials with an Amine and a Zahid and a Nickel and a Taylor. It just would have been fantastic. You mentioned it domestically. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully we get like that bracket at maybe like a Bill Farrell or a Schultz down the line with all of those guys. But yeah, I think Amine looked fantastic. Hidley looked fantastic. Nate Jackson, I thought, looked really good. Sans one match. So there's definitely a lot of parity in there in those levels behind maybe like a Taylor and a Zahid. And I would love to see where Myles Martin would have stuck or would have fit in here had he gone 86 for Ohio RTC.
Absolutely. So let's move up to 97, the true home of Jaden Cox. Ty Walz takes a 5-1 win over Tim Dudley. Walz, in some of these 97 matches, he just looks incredibly short compared to his opponents, but I think he makes it work. He does a good job of sort of shooting half shots, creating like the re-attack scramble, and then getting to his full shot. And I think we saw that a couple times here. He finished a takedown and scored a exposure in the second period after there was not much action in the first period. Dudley, was in this match. It was close, but I think Walz did a good job of controlling it. And when there was engagement between the two, he was the one initiating it, and he was the one getting the better of it.
Walz is built perfectly for freestyle. He's short, he's stout, he's explosive. He's going to be able to hold center. He's going to be able to move guys around. I'm also a little surprised you don't see more, and I guess it's tough at 97 kilos to get guys off the mat, but more of him getting fours because he's such an explosive guy and such a strong guy. But he's going to be hard to get through head hands wise. He's going to be able to hold center. So he just projects really, really well to the freestyle level. And I get that when you have guys like Kyle Snyder, who's probably like a prime version of what you want Ty Walz to be in freestyle in terms of that build and the explosiveness. And you have a Jaden Cox, it's going to be tough for him to really break through. But in terms of a depth guy, I thought he was pretty impressive throughout the weekend.
Yeah, so he went 3-2 on the weekend. This victory over Dudley, a pair of victories over Jacob Cardenas. Did lose to Hayden Zillmer and Colin Moore, but I mean, Hayden Zillmer and Colin Moore have been in the finals of the U.S. Open. So I think Ty Walz, and that's really the beauty of this event because Walz is a guy who's been around the block. He's had solid results in some international tournaments like the one in Cuba. And he may not make a U.S. Open final, and he may not, make noise in an Olympic trials, but he's still a solid wrestler, and he can still win matches. And he was able to have a great showing in this tournament and this finals.
And you're looking at 97 kilos now, and you have Kyle Snyder and Jaden Cox right there at the top. You've got Colin Moore, who looks fantastic. You've got Mike Machiavello, who I thought looked pretty good. You've got Ty Walz. Suddenly you're looking at a really strong weight class for the U.S. and a good amount of depth there.
Yeah, I thought that it's one of those weights where you think that for years it was Kyle Snyder and everyone else. And even though like a lot of the names are the same, it seems that everyone is improving and jumping levels. And it's gone from a weight where it was kind of like maybe people were moving to other divisions to stay away from Snyder to now it's like there's a whole like crust there of guys who are, you know, any given day. I mean, we saw Machiavello beat Colin Moore, which was a result I did not see. I was very impressed by him. I thought he had a solid weekend. Hayden Zilmer, you know, I said he was the most underrated guy on the ladder. He's a tough match for everybody. Doesn't let people score a lot of points. He, you know, had a great showing in this tournament as well. So I'm pretty excited for 97, mostly for the showdown between Cox and Snyder in the Olympic trials final, if we get that. But I think that there's going to be a lot of exciting and interesting matches along the way as well.
It's really become a weight that's become a strength for the U.S., which has also been the case with, I'm assuming, the next weight that we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. I was going to say, we talked about 97 developing, but I think if the story coming out of this event is going to have to be heavyweight. We saw some of the biggest names throw down. We saw some wildly different results. We saw some crazy matches. We had Gwiz and Mason Parris and Gwiz and Gable Stevenson. We did not see Gable Stevenson versus Mason Parris, but I'm sure we'll see that soon. But this match here, Mason Parris versus Jordan Wood. Parris scored a takedown, a 4-point exposure, and a 2-point exposure early in the match to pretty much set the tone. It was one sequence, and he ends up taking the final 12-1. I thought that Wood, I mean, he lost 12-1, but I think he got to some shots, and I thought he didn't just, you know, clam up. He still was going for it. I just think that Mason Parris physically, and now he's really refining his skills, is very impressive heavyweight, and I thought he had a great showing in this tournament. And he's one of those guys where it looks like he's holding position, he's wrestling, it's a heavyweight match, and then it just out of nowhere, just this blast of athleticism, and it just is crazy. I mean, he got to a sweep single, he got the takedown, he lifted the leg almost for like a Turk, turned that into 4, and then he just took it through again for 2, and it was just like a 15-second burst and 8 points were on the board. Parris
is one of those guys that, first of all, he's still not just learning freestyle, but I really think learning the intricacies of wrestling after being a dual sport athlete with wrestling and football from not the biggest power program in Indiana. So I think that's still coming along, what you saw in the first Gwiz match where he went up 8-0 and was eventually got laced. And he still kind of takes some sloppy shots. I think he's maybe a little overconfident in his ability to get the legs and puts himself into bad spots. But, man, when he goes, he's just so quick for a guy his size. And even though he'd probably be – undersized is not the word because he's a huge man. But he's smaller than Gwiz. I mean, he's smaller than somebody like Gwiz. But when he gets to a leg, it just seems like he's just freakishly strong in how he's able to pull in single legs or get guys off the mat. You saw anybody who watched his junior, maybe U23 final? Somebody's gonna get me on this. Against Zaire of Iran. Got to like a dump position, almost got stopped dead, and then just dumps him and gets the fall. Just a really, really strong, really athletic kid who I think – I don't know what the gap is between he and Gable right now, whether there is a gap. I think I would give Gable a slight edge. But I think a lot of that gap right now is made up of Gable's match IQ and understanding of positions. I think athletically, like, they're really, really close to one another.
Yeah, so, I mean, let's talk about the rest of Mason Parris' day. Like you mentioned, in his first match, he had an 8-0 lead on Nick Gwizdowski, but Gwizdowski came back mostly with leg laces to take an 18-8 tech. Parris then took an 8-2 victory over Anthony Nelson, which is pretty incredible unto itself. Scoring 8 points against Anthony Nelson is not an easy task. And then in the rematch, he won 10-7 over Gwiz. Gable also defeated Gwiz in this tournament, setting up a really interesting freestyle Olympic trials at 120 kilograms. I think the match that most people are going to be talking about, because it has implications for college and the trials, is the Gable Stevenson versus Mason Parris match that you spoke of. And I think at this point, I would still favor Gable, mostly because of what you said about the freestyle savvy and understanding those positions. But it's hard to really quantify or qualify Parris at this point because he is a guy who, because of his situation coming from football, he's making meaningful jumps regularly. I mean, if you look at like his rivalry with Cassiope of Iowa, it went from like Cassiope winning to Cassiope like kind of winning to like it not even being close in like a year and a half. And I think that it's hard to imagine that trajectory continuing, but at the same time, we have not seen anything to indicate that that trajectory is not continuing. So by the time they wrestle, either it be in the college season or during the Olympic trials, Parris may have continued to make jumps from where he is now.
Yeah, like if you had to put me on the spot right now, I would probably think that Gable and Parris have the best chance of making the trials finals, which seems insane. And I know, I honestly think Nick Gwizdowski's been so good for so long that he's now become underrated somehow.
Right, yeah.
As a two-time world medalist, because you got like the shiny new toys and Gable and Parris, and a little bit of talk there about Greg Kirkfleet, who's another one that I think might be another half step behind there. I think we would agree, I think most people would agree is not quite at that level, but like you haven't seen it yet, so it's one of those things that you're like, oh well, I'd be interested in watching it. But then you have a Cassiope. You're at the point where 125 depth-wise is as good as it's been in decades at least.
For sure. And I was about to commend you for making it through this whole discussion without bringing up the Penn State guy, but you didn't make it, so there you go.
I've got to do a thorough assessment of the weight class here.
No, but I think with the freestyle results that we've seen from Kirkfleet, I mean, I think that he's going to be part of that triumvirate if there is a college season because he just looks so solid against veterans and, seasoned guys at heavyweight. I mean, we talked about the crust at 97, but I mean, we're kind of seeing that at heavyweight as well. I mean, guys like Hamida and, Cassiope, I mean, it's a solid weight, and these guys are just separating themselves from that. And I do agree as well on the underratedness of Quiz. I mean, 2 world bronze in 3 years at heavyweight is impressive for the United States. And it does seem like now he took losses to both Gable and to Mason this weekend that I think a lot of people will be picking against him at trials, but we'll see how that goes. I mean, we still don't know about these guys' training situations. I know NC State's team has been training, but, it's probably fair to assume he did not fully peak for this event, so I don't want to write him off, but considering the results for this weekend, it's going to be in a very interesting Olympic trials for sure.
Put you on the spot right now. Who takes the 125 spot? Should there be an Olympics and Olympic trials?
Gable.
I'll choose Mason Parris.
All right, there you go. Yeah.
I don't know how much I believe it, but
I know. Yeah. Well, we'll hold on to the tape and then delete it when we're both wrong and Blitz wins. So. But I want to see it because it's going to be great. But also, in addition to the RTC Cup this weekend, there also on Friday was the Tar Heel Wrestling Club's first foray into the COVID event hosting deal. We're going to talk about the top 2 matches from that. In the first one we're going to talk about, we finally get away from the metric system, 155 pounds, Austin O'Connor taking on former 2-time NCAA champion Dean Heil. And this is interesting because it was really not much of a match. O'Connor dominated from start to finish. He finished the match 11-0 with about 30 seconds left to take the tech, but he was the one coming forward. He was able to get to his leg attacks. Once Heil started to fade, he was able to get involved with his traditional front headlock that he basically gets on everybody. I want to get your thoughts here because Austin O'Connor had 1 loss last year to Pat Lugo, and he was going to be a high seed at the NCAA tournament. He did not wrestle a lot of the other top wrestlers at the weight like Sammy Sasso. He was 3rd as a freshman the previous year. It's hard for me to imagine that he was going to beat Lugo just because of the way their first match went. But Lugo's gone. I mean, if there is a tournament, is Austin O'Connor the favorite at this weight based on this performance?
Yeah. I guess you have to say yes.
Right? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I think Austin O'Connor's one of those kids that almost has become an afterthought, which is insane to say. But 4-time state champion in Illinois, went to a non-power program in UNC, which I know people know is on the rise, but they don't think of it in the way that we think about an NC State or Virginia Tech because they haven't won the NCAA tournament or an ACC tournament yet. And because they haven't had that NCAA finalist or NCAA champ, unless I'm forgetting somebody of note. But O'Connor really impressed me with his attack rate and his aggressiveness. I think that's another thing that why people kind of write off O'Connor in his previous seasons with UNC. He's won matches, but won a lot of tight matches, won a lot of matches that weren't all that open or high scoring. He was all over Dean Heil. And again, you don't know where Heil's at in his training. It's up at 155. You don't know where Heil's at weight-wise. I thought O'Connor looked a little bit bigger. But he was just really aggressive in terms of moving Heil around the mat, changing levels, working on that front head, pulling on that head. Scored on 2 or 3 go-behinds, head and hole go-behinds there towards the end. I was really impressed with one, what good shape O'Connor was in, and 2, the variance of his offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think Heil clearly, his game plan was to wait for the attacks to come and then try to score on re-attacks, or, get to better positions out of that. And it just never materialized. I mean, O'Connor was either getting to his legs or he was controlling the head, and it just dictated the match from start to finish. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point I would put him ahead. I do think a match, him versus Sammy Sasso, could be like a 1-1 30 overtime match. But I want to see that. And then also a guy who had a great performance at the U23s recently, Brock Moeller. Brock Moeller and Austin O'Connor would also be a match at 149. So
yeah, and you wonder if somebody like a Jaden Ironman is going to wrestle if he's at 149 or 141. If a Yanni Diakomahalis is going to wrestle, there's still no clarification on what the hell we're doing with Olympic red shirts.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess this year has been ruled it doesn't take a year of eligibility either way. So I would guess that the guys would sit out, like guys like Yanni and guys like Ironman, but who the heck knows at this point, or whether we're even going to have a season. But it's definitely somebody that's going to be in the conversation regardless of where he ends up.
All right, so in the main event, 64 kilograms, Macey Kilty taking on Emma Bruntil. They made a big deal out of the fact that this was the first one of these one-off club events to be headlined by a women's match, and it seemed warranted. Kilty's multiple-time age group world champion, and Emma Bruntil had previously beaten her. Their first meeting was 6-4, and I think that if you watch the match, Kilty got to a single scored, then she kind of just like zoned out on a restart, and Bruntil was able to plow through for 4, and the final takedown was Kilty going for broke and not getting it. So I think that it seemed like Kilty should be able to win this match because she was able to get to her single, and her only lapse was really, it just seemed like a mental lapse, like she just stopped wrestling. And I think that played out here. She got a point on a shot clock early in the match, and then almost immediately after she got the shot clock point, she finished her swing single that she gets all the time, and that was the only points. You'd like to see people continue to score in the second period. There's no scoring here, but I think considering the fact that she gave up a 4-point lead in their first meeting, it is meaningful that she was able to hold on to the 3-0 lead and keep the shutout. It
is almost frightening how savvy Macey Kilty is when it comes to wrestling freestyle. I mean, obviously she doesn't wrestle folk, but in terms of knowing her game, knowing where she's strong, in terms of holding center and controlling position on the mat, in terms of knowing situations with the shot clock, in terms of knowing how aggressive or not aggressive she can be to not be pulling the clock herself. This match was 3-0, and it was I'm going to call it a little dull, but I'm going to say it was dull because Macey Kilty wanted that to be that way. As soon as she got up 3-0, she was like, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to take it. And if I don't, I'm going to hold center and work off of Bruntil shots. And she pretty much neutralized anything Bruntil had offensively, which has not been the case at age levels for Emma Bruntil, who was I want to say WCWA, excuse me if I'm wrong, national champ.
WCWC. Yes, sorry.
No, that's what you're here for. But it was a national champ this past year and does have a win over her. And Bruntil never really got close to scoring in this one. I thought Kilty was super savvy. One of the things I want to comment on was not only were they the main event, but UNC's program has done a good job with building their women's program. Had Becca Leathers and Haley Agello down there before, have Macey Kilty down there now, and they don't currently have a women's program, but it would not shock me at all if they're the first program, the first big name Division I program to dip their toes into the water with a women's wrestling program.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe they have another young competitor there. What's her name? She wrestled on the Rumble on the Rooftop show and absolutely dominated. She's at UNC, isn't she? You know what I'm talking about?
I do not know, but it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
there is they are actively recruiting a very talented Fargo champion at the moment, who I can't mention, but I don't know whether that is to wrestle for their program or do the whole Macey Kilty thing, which is not typical. It's very interesting to see that Kilty is not wrestling collegiately, at least at this point.
So you're saying that they actually a women's competitive college team is on the table?
It would not surprise me. I mean, knowing that they are actively pursuing other high school wrestlers to wrestle alongside Kilty and anybody else that's down there, it would not. I think that we're not far from a big name school fielding a program, and UNC is certainly looking as strong as anyone in terms of leading the way there.
Well, that would be awesome. I think that Coleman Scott's doing a great job at that program, and if he wants to be the one to break that glass and bring that to the NCAA Division I Power Conference level, I think that would be a welcome addition. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think it's long overdue, and programs in the past like Iowa have done well, Arizona State currently, UNC, but I definitely think that we're not far from that. Having seen women's wrestling be granted emerging sports status in Division II, I think that's something that in the next 5 to 10 years, some big name program is going to be the one to make a splash.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have finished the matches. We're going to talk about anything that you want to plug on this Sunday morning, Clay.
Nothing specifically, but we talked before we got on air. It looks like maybe we might be getting a Roman Bravo Young Aljamain Sterling wrestling match December 22nd. On Rockfin, hosted by Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. Something to keep an eye on, and something that we would surely be all over if it comes. Sounds like we're getting the D1 season where they're going to try. We got some schedules out this week from NC State, and I want to say UNC had media day for Oklahoma State and John Smith. So just around the corner, maybe, but definitely something to keep an eye on.
Coaches, college season. Listen to me. Just one tournament. Anyone can enter, one entry per team, no qualification. Just let it go.
Hey, I'll be all over if that's the case.
It would be absolutely great. You have no excuse not to do it this year with the way things are. I mean, because we were talking about – Jersey Hokie and I were talking on Twitter about seeding for a tournament under these circumstances. And
yeah, don't seed them. Just throw them in there.
Right, yeah. But qualification is going to be ridiculous as well. So
yeah,
just
64-man brackets, 128-man brackets, do it over a week.
Yeah, do it. Yeah, right? Do it over a week. It'd be great.
Do it like state tournament style. Like you got regionals. You can throw them into a super regional, throw them into a national tournament. Bing bang, we're in.
So for my plugs, check me out, fightforecast.substack.com, throwing out some MMA stats stuff. Also, I'm going to have something on Fight Matrix this weekend because Austin Troutman, former All-American at Appalachian State, made his MMA debut against a man with a 15-94 record, which is the most losses in the history of MMA. So I have to talk about that. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I'm on Twitter at Richard A. Mann. Always there, always talking. Yeah.
That's all I got. You guys can follow me at RTC Sauertieg. Richard, I appreciate you having me on. Glad to be back at it.
All right. Talk to you guys later.